Hello, good evening, and welcome back to another episode of Minds on Guard, where we're learning how to guard our minds against all of the manipulations and attacks that we come under in today's 21st century media landscape, whether that be through social media, the news media, mainstream, cable news, and really any environment where we engage with information and the exchange of ideas. We need to learn how to think well and reason through them to the best of our abilities. For tonight's video, we're going to continue our look at Edward Thorndike and his influence and views on the education system in America. Last week, in our introduction to Thorndike, we learned about his background as an experimental psychologist and his expansion of that field into the classroom setting. While he was not the only psychologist to conduct research on American students, Thorndike's developments in the fields of behaviorism and psychological conditioning were highly influential and adopted widely across many areas of the education environment. These methods of conditioning have had seriously harmful effects on the cognitive abilities of generations of American children, ultimately leading to a general decline in intelligence and complex reasoning skills at the level of the society. This is a serious problem, and I feel that it's important that we try to understand why this has happened, along with the how of what has taken place. To do that, we're going to examine a little more of what Edward Thorndike was involved with regarding his experiments, as well as a brief look at some other well-known behaviorist ideas. We will then discuss the driving factors behind the men who conducted the kinds of research and social experimentation, as well as their financial backers, who were in positions of power and influence such that they were able to direct policies and system-wide adoption of these psychological conditioning programs. This will take a couple of videos. We've already started this series and we'll continue it in the coming weeks. And this will hopefully connect a few of the concepts that we've touched on in the past and continue to build out that mosaic that I've described so that we can begin to understand the broader picture of the progression of control that has been exerted over so many areas of life in the 21st century. A very helpful tool that we can use to gain understanding of any topic or area of discussion is to seek out source material from which we can gain insights on how people or organizations think and operate. This is a very helpful thing to do because it gives us a direct line to the group or person and their ideas in their own words. A major problem of the media environment today is that we receive second or third or even fourth-hand information, and then many times that's used to base our thoughts and understanding on whatever it is we're endeavoring to learn. This is dangerous because we don't know for certain what aspects have shifted in the sharing of that information. I'm sure many people are familiar with the game Telephone, where a person whispers something to another person who is then meant to share what they heard to one more person, and then on down a line of individuals, the statement is whispered until we reach the final person, who's then meant to say out loud what they have heard. Very often, the final statement has been through some changes from the original, and sometimes quite drastic ones. This is a pretty simple example that illustrates what can happen when we do not seek out source material in our efforts to learn about a subject. There is a lot that goes into utilizing source material. Context is a major factor that we must consider, and we should look for any kinds of manipulations that may be present with any source we use. One of the best things to do is to take what a person has said and start thinking and reasoning from the words that they use. This is what we did when we looked at John Dewey's thoughts on what education should be concerned with. Recall him saying that Education consists either in the ability to use one's powers in a social direction or else in the ability to share in the experiences of others and thus widen the individual consciousness to that of the race. The ultimate problem of all education is to coordinate the psychological and social factors. The coordination demands that the child be capable of expressing himself, but in such a way as to realize social ends. We can do the same thing when learning about Edward Thorndike. According to Thorndike, education is interested primarily in the general interrelation of man and his environment, in all the changes which make possible a better adjustment of human nature to its surroundings. When we look at these two statements, we see a pretty clear convergence of ideas. What both Dewey and Thorndike believed was that humans are social animals and must be trained to adapt their inner condition to reflect the changing desires of their environment, rather than develop the ethics and personal responsibility to change the environment in order to suit the established needs of society. There are inherent problems here as the conditioning hinders and blocks the mental pathways for complex thinking, specifically regarding logic and ordered thinking. What I mean by this is that when a child is trained to go along with the desires of a group, they do not learn what it takes to think past the immediate outcome of any behavior or thought. Ideas and behaviors have consequences, and each choice or thought has its second, third, fourth, and fifth orders which outcrop and branch off from the initial decision. By conditioning children to appeal to the whims of their environment, we're teaching them that the only thing that they need to be concerned with is what feels best to the most amount of people in the moment. This may seem small, but I have seen some of the most harmful and damaging outcomes when people are thinking and behaving in this way. It leads to objectification, neglect, bitterness, loneliness, and worst of all, an ever-shifting foundation of what is decided upon as good and right. When we live out this behavioral training, we have no solid grounding of truth from which we can anchor ourselves and make decisions about the world. We become passive observers, simply going with whatever is most popular at any given time and, essentially, abandon our responsibility to think for ourselves. This is a very concerning and serious issue for me because I have personal experience with the outcomes of this kind of programming. I have caused damage to many relationships by thinking and living in these ways. I also have missed many amazing opportunities because I lacked the will to think and decide against what felt best at the time I had to make a choice to risk or take the easy road in life. This kind of behavior is being programmed into generations of children and leading to rampant narcissism that is only growing in its ubiquity with every passing year. Pretty soon, we will have whole countries of people who have no care or desire to behave in morally right ways, but instead simply go along to get along, seeking the next hit of narcissistic supply and dopamine from whatever new machine has been rolled out by the controlling entities in order to ensure that all of us who have been deemed unworthy of freedom and liberty stay locked in the cages of our own selfish designs. What I have described here is really the net results of this kind of conditioning we see from the experimental psychology of Dewey and Thorndike. There are intermediate steps along the way that lead to the kinds of poor thinking and breakdown of individual responsibility and ownership of one's life. These steps are varied in their implementation and have been carried out in many ways over the decades that this kind of training has been adopted in American schools. In my view, the methodology can be summed up through Thorndike's own words. In his book, Elementary Principles of Education, Thorndike discussed what he considered to be the three main functions of elementary schooling. First, to provide for each child 6 years of experience designed to enable him to make, at each step in the period, adjustments to the most essential phases of life. To adjust this general education to each child requires a considerable degree of specialization in accordance with individual differences. Consequently, the elementary school has a second function, namely to determine as accurately as possible the native intellectual capacities, the physical, emotional, temperamental, recreational, aesthetic, and other aptitudes of children. Since some pupils will find it necessary or advisable to enter a vocation in the middle teens, a third function is essential in some degree, namely to explore the vocational interests and aptitudes of pupils and to provide some measure of vocational adjustment for those who will leave school at the earliest legal age. In the first point, we see the continued appeal to experience as opposed to skill development and acquisition. The inherent problem with this is noted by Thorndike in that the specialization required to address every individual child's personal skill level throughout the years of providing the stimulus of experience is very difficult. Each child will respond differently to the stimuli, and therefore, in Thorndike's view, we must subject each child to psychological evaluation during the years of the exposure to the various stimulus experiences in the classroom setting, so that the differences in each child can be tracked properly. What this shows is that Thorndike believed that each child's intellectual capacity is set prior to them ever entering the classroom setting. That's what he means when he says the word native in that explanation. By exposing children to the same stimuli, this teaching methodology absolves any teacher of their responsibility to their students in that they're supposed to teach them how to achieve success in their educational careers. By homogenizing the learning environment, the teacher is able to pass off their own failures as educators, determined by the number of students who do not learn any given subject, as simply a problem with the student. After all, the ones who excelled had the same experience as the one who failed. Through these psychological evaluations, the failures of students can be chalked up to issues within their own inherent capacity to excel, as determined by various testing factors. Then this leads to Thorndike's third point, and one that betrays more of his worldview than anything else. By suggesting that certain students would be better served by leaving the traditional educational environment and instead opt for vocational training, Thorndike shows his hand in that he believes certain people are simply born unable to learn and should instead be put to work. He states, "When all facts are taken into account, we believe it will be found that the best interests of the individual and society will be served by providing a certain number of the pupils least gifted in intelligence with the equipment needed to begin their vocational career by the completion of the junior high school period or even earlier in a few cases. Other individuals will advance their own welfare and that of society by securing but one more year, others by 2, others by 3 additional years." Thus, although the great majority of children should spend some time in the junior high school, not all of them should be expected to continue to the completion of senior high school course. Each child should have as much high school work as the common good requires. It was this appeal to the common good and the rationale for vocational discrimination and selection through testing that was ultimately utilized by people seeking to further the ideas of eugenics programs. This very psychological testing methodology would pave the way for American eugenicists like H. Goddard, Louis Terman, and Robert Yerkes to coin terms like moron and further ideologies like racial dullness and general feeble-mindedness of the colored race. The effects of these ideologies persist into today. We will continue our exploration of the destruction of American minds through the education system in next week's video. Until then, stay safe, stay diligent, and stay vigilant, keeping your minds on guard.